Okay, let's do this. Right. So this is the Technical Oversight Committee panel discussion. I'm going to ask a few questions. Hopefully you'll all ask a few questions as well. We'll try and make it pretty interactive. Can I get all the panelists to just kind of really, really very briefly say who you are, please? Start at one end. Have you got microphones?
Sorry. I'm that guy. That's my intro.
I'm Brian Grant. I work on Kubernetes at Google. I'm the Kubernetes steering committee and SIG architecture.
I don't think that's working.
Yeah.
Is it on?
No, it's not on.
There we go.
Can you hear me now? Testing, testing.
That's better.
I'm Brian Grant. I work on Kubernetes at Google. On the Kubernetes steering committee and SIG architecture co-chair.
I'm Ben Heineman. I'm one of the co-founders of a company called Mesosphere and the chief product officer there. And before that, I spent a lot of time at Twitter helping to build out their very large private cloud container orchestration system. And before that, I was at Berkeley where I created a technology called Mesos.
I'm Jonathan Bull. I also actually worked at Twitter on this cloud architecture a while ago, and now I'm doing sort of mostly stuff in the container ecosystem, consulting for a few companies in Europe. I've been pretty active in the container space in the last few years.
Hi, I'm Quinton Houle, Technical Vice President of Cloud Computing at Huawei, and previously Google, SRE, Kubernetes team in the early days, and prior to that I was the founding engineer of EC2 at Amazon way back in, I guess that was 2006, which has come a long way since then.
The founding engineer.
Hi, I'm Brian Cantrell. I'm the CTO of Joyent and Container, Bête Noire, and Enfant Terrible.
Brian, the phrase is the founding engineer.
I thought it was, sorry, yes, the Enfant Terrible.
Hi, I'm Ken Owens. I'm in charge of cloud native development at MasterCard and the CI/CD platform at MasterCard. Before that, I was at this little company called Cisco, where I founded Mantle and Shipped and some of the other open source container work that came out of that effort.
I am Alexis Richardson. I'm the co-founder of Weaveworks, a container and Kubernetes company. We also do something called GitOps that you might have heard me talking about at length. Before that, I was at Pivotal, where I ran the Spring and vFabric teams, creating things like Spring Boot and Spring Cloud as a PM. And previously, VMware, RabbitMQ, Redis. I've had my evil hands in many open source projects.
Awesome. I should probably just say hi for anybody who wasn't in the keynotes this morning. My name's Liz Rice, and I work for Aqua Security. And I get the joy of asking lots of, hopefully, difficult and challenging questions. Okay, so let's start with, how do you get a project accepted to the CNCF? Don't take too long.
Sorry, is this on the record?
I believe so. Asking for a friend.
Take the check out to cash.
So I get this question a lot from projects that are interested in becoming part of the CNCF. The usual process is that either someone on the TOC or in the community identifies a project as being potentially interesting, or the project reaches out to us. Now that CNCF is much more widely known, the latter is a very common case, and we discuss what the place where it might fit in the cloud native ecosystem. If someone from the TOC is interested, we usually invite the project to present, although that project is changing a little bit with the introduction of the sandbox, where a project just needs to find 2 sponsors on the TOC. So if someone comes to me with a project, for example, and I think some other member of the TOC might be interested, I'll forward it to them and say, hey, here's an interesting project that I think you might be interested in, and if they are interested, then we can make that connection. If the project seeks to enter at the incubation level, then there is a presentation to the TOC during one of our bi-weekly meetings. If the TOC is interested in moving forward at that point, we'll ask them to draft a proposal, and a TOC sponsor will iterate with them on the proposal, and then there's a vote, and 6 members need to approve the project in order for it to get in. The sandbox, as I said, is a lower bar because it's there to foster innovation and earlier stage projects, so just 2 TOC members need to sponsor, and it has a lighter weight process. We do still want to make sure that it fits with the goals and the principles, the way we're operating the CNCF and the TOC. But other than that, it's a bit more exploratory and experimental projects that we have in mind there. So it's, sometimes, especially earlier on, we've asked projects, we deferred discussion of projects for quite a while, some even up to a year, and came back and said, yes, actually, we think this does make sense, or we said, no, it doesn't make sense, or the project decided to go a different way, and all those things have happened. And some projects that we've reached out to have said, no, we're not interested right now either. And the CNCF provides certain services to projects, so one question we always ask projects is, what would you like to get from the CNCF? And we also explain to them what we're trying to do for projects to see if there's a good match of expectations. Does that answer
Anybody
the
else
question?
want to pitch in on this?
So in addition to Brian's answers, the thing I would counsel projects is to really ask the question of the project: why do you want to? Why the CNCF? Why is it important to your project? What do you hope to get out of being at the CNCF? What do you hope to bring to the CNCF? Because I think that when there's an idea that like, well, I want to be in the CNCF because I want to get my project some momentum. That's probably the wrong reason to be in the CNCF. You want to be sure that what you're looking for as a project is something that the CNCF is going to make available to you. So I think answering that question for the project is really the first step. And
So
having
what would
crisp
a
answer.
good answer to that question be? What are good reasons? If growth is a bad reason, what's
No, I don't think growth is necessarily a bad reason. I think a good reason is, we've got a lot of momentum for this project, and it's across a couple different companies now. And my boss is kind of on me to understand why are we not getting this into a foundation, and I want to have some broader foundation resources. That's a great reason.
I mean, a project should be able to succeed on its own merits, whether it's in the CNCF or not. I think that's kind of a key point.
Okay. What projects do you think, or what kind of technologies do you think we're missing from the current family of projects? And kind of related, should we have more than one solution potentially for certain areas of technology?
Sorry, more what?
More than one solution. So, I mean, Containerd and Rocket being one example of competing technologies, but is that a good thing, or is it a healthy thing, or should the CNCF be opinionated about the choice of componentry?
I can answer that one. I think we explicitly do not want to be a one-solution shop for any given problem. And we strongly actually encourage there to be multiple options available. And we believe that, over time, the market will either pick one of them or pick multiple of them for different reasons in different use cases. And I think that's a model that we strongly support. What was the other question again? Remind me.
What's missing?
Oh, what's missing? That's a very good question. So I have a personal opinion on it, which I haven't actually discussed broadly in TOC, but I think one of the things that we're missing is a kind of a coherent framework for general distributed applications. So we've got all these pieces, and some people use some of them and some people use others, and all of them have different ways of interacting with them. Some of them use REST APIs, some of them use gRPC, some of them use whatever. But from a programmer's point of view, and in general, it's reasonably easy to orchestrate applications that have already been written. So we know how to manage containers and hook them together with meshes and things like this. But writing the applications inside the containers is actually still remarkably difficult, in my opinion. And I've got one sort of data point, which is I used to run the SRE teams at Google, running all the ad systems. Now, serving ads is actually not a fundamentally terribly difficult thing. You send some data to the web server and you get some ads back that are contextualized for you. But the number of engineers, and I don't know if I can sort of make it public, but it's many thousands of the best engineers in the world writing what is essentially a reasonably straightforward application. That seems like wrong to me. That seems like it should be easier. And there are many other examples of systems where there are many thousands of engineers writing something that is fundamentally reasonably straightforward if you have the right primitives available for distributed systems, which I don't think we have the primitives, they're just kind of difficult to piece together.
Any more pieces that you would say we're
Continuous
missing?
delivery.
Continuous delivery. Any more?
I've got a couple if no one else is going to go. I think getting more stateful kind of technologies. We've got a couple of, in particular, databases. We've got a couple of databases that are in the pipeline, or things that CockroachDB. I know that FoundationDB is here. They had a pre-day event. We had the PingCap folks and TIKV, and there's some interesting stuff out there. I would like to see us get one of those kind of across the finish line as a real, or ideally multiple of those. And then I'd like to also see some complementary projects to some of our existing projects. Prometheus is great, but Prometheus, part of the power of Prometheus is that it allows a lot of different kind of technologies to back it. And I'd like to see us pull some of those technologies. I love Uber's M3, I think is really interesting. And I'd like to see, there's some missing pieces there. So
There's also different kinds of projects from different parts of the world.
The mic's not working.
Hello.
There it
There are
is.
different projects from different parts of the world, I think is important. I was very excited by all of the TIKV stuff because it's built in China. I've never seen a project of that ambition from there before, and I think we want to see more of that. We'd also like to see more. There are gaps from end user companies. Prometheus and Envoy were both created to solve a problem at an end user tech company.
and Jaeger.
And Jaeger, there you go. So I think we want to see more of those.
Yep.
And I'd also like to see CSI brought in.
So how many projects would be too many?
When we start having apps and app frameworks, we may end up with a lot of projects.
Yeah.
I think the answer to that there are a couple of dimensions. One is, how many projects can we meaningfully manage? If if the CNCF has 500 projects, like how do we actually add value to 500 projects, and are we tooled up to do that? Which we could do, we could scale. The other question is, to what extent is it a complete solution? I think to me the answer lies in, if I'm an application developer and I'm building a large distributed application and I can build it using only CNCF components and it works well, then the CNCF has succeeded. If I either, look at all the CNCF bits and I don't have stuff I need, I either have to build it myself or go and shop for it somewhere else, then I think the CNCF isn't not yet succeeded.
I see a little bit of dissent at that end, Brian.
As was mentioned earlier, a project, an open source, not all open source projects have to be in the CNCF to be successful. There are examples of other useful open source projects, like Spark is just one example that users find useful. So I don't think we need to necessarily build competing solutions just because they're not in CNCF, but I do agree that out in open source in general, there needs to be a complete solution, and I totally agree that 500 projects, it's hard for me to see how that would be manageable if I look at Apache overall as a user trying to consume those technologies. Other than a few examples, it's really hard to make decisions about which ones should I choose, which ones are still, sort of desirable alternatives that are actively maintained and are best of breed kind of projects. So one thing we've started talking about as we grow is actively curating our portfolio of projects. If some projects aren't going the direction we think is still useful for users, making sure that we communicate that to users. So we just, I can imagine that 5 years from now, 10 years from now, especially as we take experimental projects into the sandbox, there will be some projects that would have had to have been pruned by then, so that we just don't have, an incomprehensible set of projects, some of which are, critical that people should absolutely use, and some of which are no longer relevant.
Anything else to add on that?
Too, when you're asking, how many projects is too many projects is a great question. I mean, how much software is too much software? And I think that's the problem that we are all grappling with. I mean, it's a great problem to have, in that there is much more opportunity, much more heterogeneity, much more choice than there was a decade ago, 2 decades ago. We're a long way from a LAMP stack where effectively all those choices have been made for you. And there are a lot of options out there. I think that optionality is great. I think that we need to continue to expand as long as that software ecosystem is expanding. I think that we should, because we need to recognize that practitioners are overwhelmed, and part of the service that we can provide is providing some clarity and some elevation for some of these projects, so that practitioners can get some guidance on the different choices that have been made, the different values that have these different communities.
Okay. I see a question from the audience.
How do you
James.
check on projects' health?
Just get a mic.
How do you check on projects' health currently after, over a period of time, right? That is one of the questions that will help you figure out whether you can scale or not.
That is an excellent question. I think you're going to get a lot of different answers to that. I will tell you that one kind of cautionary note that I would sound is it's tempting to look at kind of GitHub traffic as a metric of health, and the danger with that is that doesn't allow software to get correct and mature. And you will see software for which the commit traffic goes way down because it works. I mean, like, God forbid, it actually fulfills its function and works. Like, well, you're very unhealthy. It's like, actually, I think I'm post-pubescent, actually. So we need to be, we have to balance a bunch of these things, and there's actually a great dashboard that Chris and co have put together that's interesting because it looks at a bunch of different metrics, doesn't try to pretend there's one metric.
I think another thing is to ask individual members of the community for just a few questions like, do you think you all agree about where this project will be in a year's time? And if you have a healthy project, you'll usually get the same answer. If you have an unhealthy project, you'll find that people don't actually agree on things like that. And then you need to dig a bit more deep.
Another measure of health is adoption of the projects, and that is something that CNCF tracks in terms of things like social media mentions, press mentions, share of voice, and that kind of thing. So you can see about, well, maybe other emerging projects or technologies are superseding that one. I don't know if we're doing any kind of sentiment analysis, but we're starting to look at NPS.
A little bit. Or they're starting to, but I mean, we have a public dashboard that we posted to the TOC list recently. That's a bit of an experiment. Each metric, take it with a grain of salt. The fact that like Brian said, if the project hasn't released in 6 months, maybe it's pretty damn stable and mature, or maybe it's dying. So who knows?
Why I was asking was in the ASF, each of the projects have to send a written report to the board, and they have frequency at which the projects have to send in. And that has a lot of the details that can be captured, like you mentioned.
I think our goal was to automate that and not put the burden on the project to kind of produce something, because at the end of the day, producing a report on Git statistics and other things, you could automate the hell out of that, in my opinion.
Most reports on the Apache Foundation they're not to the depth that someone's sitting down and actually having a conversation about whether or not the project is really healthy. A lot of it is collecting a lot of these metrics, so all that stuff should be automated. And there's some metrics that are very useful though that you can still look at. If someone opens up a PR and it doesn't get touched for a really long time. If someone opens up an issue and there's no comment on the issue. So there are those kind of things that you can look out to give you some insight. But I think at the end of the day, it's also a conversation with the community. It's a conversation with the users, not just the contributors, but also the users, to understand whether or not they feel like they're getting what they want out of the project. And maybe they're not, and we need to change the maintainers, and other people need to step in and continue to move this forward. And maybe they are, and it's just super stable, and there's just not a lot happening. That's a great project. That's the best project. We have a lot of apps like that. NC, use it all the time. LS, use it all the time,
There's a question there.
Code doesn't change all the time.
So why did HCD take so long to join the CNCF?
Some people take some time to fully comply with legal requirements and decisions to get things through, so every project's different.
We were waiting for it to be acquired by IBM.
You and those IBM jokes.
That's unhealthy.
So another question a little bit further back.
What's the status of the Keycloak stuff?
Keycloak.
Backlog.
It's backlog, yeah.
Yeah, if you go to the GitHub CNCF thing, there's a project dashboard. It's currently in the backlog for review.
Well, that's a great question, though. The backlog, are the processes working? Are we able to deal with requests and projects?
Yeah, I actually wanted to mention this in the context of some of the earlier questions as well about scaling and project health. But I think in general, as the number of projects grows, a TOC of 7 reasonably busy people, 9 is it, is just not sufficient to actually do justice to both of those areas. And I think what we're working on at the moment is a way of broadening the base of people who can make meaningful contributions there. So the current model, proposed model, it's not finalized yet, but the proposed model that we're busy fleshing out in the next few weeks is to have something similar to the Kubernetes SIGs, where we actually have groups of specialized people who might specialize in storage, networking, observability, monitoring, application development, etc. And then those groups can actually much more actively engage with the projects in those areas and do things like, not only the automated metrics, but as we've mentioned, there's the metrics, but then there's actually people going in and talking to people and figuring out what's going on. And that doesn't scale to hundreds of projects with 9 TOC members.
This is a great opportunity for people who want to contribute to get involved.
Yeah, so I think that the projects that we are honestly most uncomfortable about are the ones that fall in the many gaps in our expertise. And there have been a couple of examples of that. And we want to be able to ask the right questions. And with some of these projects, we just don't know the right questions to ask because it's beyond our depth or it's in a domain in which none of us is familiar. So we're really looking to tap the community's expertise as we scale out the special interest groups and hope to work off some of the backlog that way. I think so. I think that we want to. I'll let my fellow TSC members give their opinion. My personal opinion that is, I would want to defer that to the actual SIGs to figure out what is the right approach. I think that with a lot of these things, if you get the right expertise in the room, the right thing will generally happen. And if it's a survey, great. And if it's something else, that's fine too.
Question over there. Sorry, I'm making Vincent just run.
So with what you just said, you were talking about having SIGs that would govern projects that fell under that category. So I've been involved with the SAFE working group that's trying to get started, and I'm very interested to see how security concerns can be better managed by this group and really be a factor in all of the projects, not just the projects that are directly related to security considerations that you have as you're building applications, but also what work we can do as a group to help all of the CNCF projects have better security practices and be more able to work together. So I'm curious to hear what you would say about that.
Yeah, I think one of the issues that we're trying to get clarity on at the moment is, what is the authority and what is the responsibility of the TOC versus what would the responsibility and authority of the SIGs be? And I think we're moving in the I think the general consensus is the TOC actually is elected by members of the CNCF to make decisions. And the SIGs are there to provide the valuable information upon which those decisions can be made. And I think we should make sure we don't confuse this with the SIGs having complete control of all the projects and complete control, because they, depending on how we do it, the TOC is responsible for doing that at the end of the day.
So just to clarify, I'm not at all suggesting that the SAFE working group or a security SIG becomes an authority that has the authority to govern what anybody is doing. And in fact, what we've been talking about most recently lately is a lot about gathering data so that we have some clarity into how people are actually, what security practices look like in real life right now, and providing that to the group. So I hope that will help.
Thank you for doing that.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I think that one of the artifacts that may come out of that work is perhaps questions that should be asked of every project. And then that's something that can be brought up to the TOC and then rebroadcasted out to their SIGs. So these are the list of concerns that we're going to ask of every project. And thank you very much to echo Alexis's appreciation. Thank you for your time and effort, because I know we're all engaged in volunteer activity ultimately. And thank you very much for your work, because you're ultimately helping to serve our domain by doing that. And thank you especially for trying to focus beyond just some specific projects about how can we take these principles or values and apply them to many different CNCF projects.
We actually have some technical due diligence guidelines that Quentin helped draft. Please, if you do develop questions we should ask, please send a PR to add them to the due diligence guidelines. It's a great way to get started. That's in the CNCF TOC repo on GitHub.
Yeah, stars that repo have. Very few stars. That's how on the dashboard?
About 11, I think.
There's a question. Jace has been waiting for a while as well.
That's right.
So this is...
Not that one, the one behind you.
What? Oh, what?
No, Jace, go ahead.
Okay.
Wait, I'm so confused. Okay, I'm going to ask a really uncomfortable question, because why not? So I look at this, the TOC here, and I see a lot of people who look like me. How do we get less people on the TOC who look... Sorry to insult you all like that, but, no, seriously.
Well, we're very much missing Camille. And,
yeah, but still, I mean, there's a lot of ways that can present. But is there any kind of outreach activities or to try and widen the net on serving different communities and different...
Particularly with the elections in
I
progress.
mean, so we're currently going through a TOC election process, and we tried really hard to kind of reach out to our wider community, ensure that we would have a more diverse pool of candidates. So for the governing board seats, there's 6 of them, and I think we have about 15% are, essentially does not look like the current TOC up there of that. So we tried to make sure at least there was a more pool of folks there, but we'll see how the election turns out.
I mean, election is an election, but you're thinking about it and focusing on that is really a step forward.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that I personally feel very passionately about diversity in general, and I don't think one should confuse the general term of diversity with gender diversity or racial diversity or anything else. I think that diversity is extremely important, and that goes across many facets. Are you primarily from a large or set of large companies that you've worked for? Are you a startup person? What country do you come from? Are you more familiar with how things work in Asia, or are you more familiar with how they work in Europe? So all these forms of diversity, I mean, sometimes, it's visible when you look at the TOC, and it is visibly not sufficiently diverse, and we need to fix that. But that's not just gender diversity or racial diversity or any specific piece of diversity.
I have an opinion about this too. Sorry. It's an important question. Thank you for asking the question as well. I did feel quite bad when we were all gathering, and it's going to be the bachelor body. It's terrible. So it's going to take time to solve this problem, but I think one of the things that we've been talking about today may help a bit, which is if we have true SIGs, which are open to the community and not elected by a board of sponsors, that creates a new path for people to come in towards the TOC. Okay? So I would encourage anybody who wishes to follow that path to do so, please.
Yeah, and I have the question. So now you have the TOC, you have the working group, then you have the SIG. So if anybody has new ideas or the project, where do they start? With the TOC or the work group or the SIG?
You can think of the working groups as MVP. Now we're iterating, and we'll have we decided on SIG versus category? Okay, so now we'll have SIG. Working groups will ultimately roll into that. So we're not going to make it confusing for people. We'll have these well-defined things, and you can go and start working there.
Yeah, maybe just to add to that, and we weren't necessarily very good with the communication, but working groups are usually finite period of time entities who get together to produce a particular thing. So in some cases, it's been a white paper. We want to understand serverless so that we can actually, standardize terminology and talk about serverless as a, reasonably well understood thing in the CNCF. We've now done that. We either reconstitute for like the next revision of that paper or broader project, but it's not a long-term ongoing thing that is responsible for the lifespan of projects over many years. So that's the working group. A working group is something that is constituted, that exists as long as there are projects that they need to manage on an ongoing basis. And so it's a different, the intention is different, not just the name.
I think there we go.
I was going to add, so, with the elections coming up and new board members, and most of you have been serving for a while, I'm nominated up for a, for a spot as well, but I was kind of wondering, like, what over your past 3 years of looking back at your serving, what are the things that you guys have learned? Mistakes, maybe a mistake that you've made, or things that they could kind of pass along to maybe future TOC members that to avoid those pitfalls or those great learnings to think about.
Great question.
That is an excellent question. And we're just out of time.
So we've tried actually to document some of the things we wanted to pass on. So as we've learned what we were looking for in projects, we actually entertained presentations from quite a few projects before we really started accepting a lot more projects as we were figuring out what we were looking for. And then as we did that, we developed the graduation criteria and the principles of the TOC, the due diligence guidelines. We updated the definition of cloud native to broaden it beyond just Kubernetes, basically. So we've been trying to formalize our learnings and get those things documented to pass them on so that the next TOC, there will be continuity there. Definitely we did, in terms of mistakes, I think there were some maybe opportunities missed. Some projects really wanted to get into a foundation really quickly. I actually am not sure that was a mistake to pass those up, as we weren't really sure. But certainly we also created the sandbox to try to provide an outlet for those kinds of early stage projects that we were willing to bet on in a more experimental fashion. So we're trying to put the structure and the documentation into place to pass on those things that we've learned.
Yeah, and I would say, I think we've made a lot of mistakes, and it's hard to know that, it's hard to second guess ourselves in some of those, because I think that what we have all been trying to do is try to take some of the enormous momentum behind these technologies and channel it in a way that assures their long-term health and viability. I think that we are all trying to serve the industry and our fellow practitioner. I do think it's very important to kind of have that constituency in mind, and the things that, I was speaking personally, that I've done that I'm most proud of is, in terms of my time on the TOC, is being able to attack some things that no one else would have attacked. You see two technologies having a Twitter spat, maybe you can come in and say, hey, maybe we can get the parties together and figure out what's going on and actually adjudicate this and resolve it. No one else is necessarily going to do that. And that's an example of where we can use some of the faith that the governing board has put in us and put that to good work in solving a common problem that someone isn't necessarily going to address.
So I want to say one thing about this. I think that it's a fairly obvious truth, but for me the most important thing about TOC members is, and future ones, is to have integrity with respect to what the overall CNCF mission is. And integrity is lost instantly, so you've got to remember that, and that's when you make the biggest mistakes.
I think we are pretty much out of time.
You want to hear Ken's mistakes? I want to hear Ken's mistakes. Ken is being a...
I was trying to take the mic, but Alexis wouldn't give it to me. He was like, no, mine. I think, in terms of this question, I think it's a great question, but the number one thing that I learned this last 3 years was when you have a group of individuals with a lot of different backgrounds and a lot of different companies they come from, or whether it's, as Alexis likes to tell us, whether you're a grown-up or a startup type of company, right? It's important that you really focus on what's the mission that you're trying to accomplish in the community, right? It's very easy for one individual or two individuals to try to steer the foundation one way or the other. And this whole group, we did a great job of staying cohesive and staying on point with. And I think probably the biggest mistake that I made was not realizing the time commitment needed to really work with the project. So I actually carve out time in my calendar every week that is sacred to CNCF activity. That was something I had to learn to do because I was just getting overwhelmed with requests coming in from projects and didn't have the time to deal with them.
Well, we want to thank you guys all for your time and your support. You probably, you see that big, huge conference or the big, huge stage, and that's all a lot due to your guys' work. So we really appreciate what you guys do for the community. So.
Great. Well, thank you so much for answering some questions. I think we are out of time. Thank you very much. Round of applause.
Thank you, Liz.